So, hello and welcome back yet again to another evening with Heidi by Johanna Spyri, where it kind of looks like Heidi is gonna get to go home finally. I feel like she's been there far longer than she thought she was going to be there. Also, I hope you guys are all doing well. We got rain last night. Unfortunately, it didn't actually cool anything off. I know I need to stop complaining about the heat because it's not going to be too long before I'm complaining about the cold. I don't know which one's worse. I think I would like it to just be perpetually autumn. That sounds really nice. I don't think that's how nature works, but it sure would be exciting, wouldn't it? Anyway, again, I really hope that you guys are all doing well. I was going to read outside, but the biggest issue with summertime when it's not blowing really hard and you could actually go out and sit outside comfortably and read is everybody on the lake is also outside. So there's like three different people mowing, and no matter how lovely the birds sound, lawnmowers are not nearly as enticing of a sound. So I've got the window open. There is a thrush out there who is singing his little heart out. So hopefully he can at least keep us entertained while Heidi goes home. Yay for Heidi. So we're jumping back in and reading chapter 13 of Heidi by Johanna Spyri, which is titled Back to the Alm. Herr Sussman climbed the stairs and knocked firmly on Fräulein Rottenheimer's door. "Please hurry and come into the dining room," he called. "Preparations must be made immediately for a journey. Quickly!" Fräulein Rottenheimer looked at her clock. It was 4:30 in the morning. She had never risen at such an hour in her life. Curiosity and excitement made everything she touched go wrong, and she made slow progress in dressing, for she kept hunting about uneasily in her room for the things she was already wearing. Meanwhile, Herr Sussman went the entire length of the hall and rang every one of the bells used to summon his different servants. When they came down, one after another, into the dining room, they stood in surprise before the master of the house. He was walking up and down through the room looking fresh and cheerful, and not at all as if a ghost had frightened him in this haunted house. Johann was immediately dispatched, and he had to put the horses and carriage in order to be brought around later. Tinette was told to awaken Heidi at once and to make her ready for a journey, and Sebastian was sent to the house where Heidi's aunt was in service to go and bring her. Meanwhile, Fräulein Rottenheimer had succeeded in getting dressed. Everything was fine except for her headdress, which was on crooked, so from a distance she looked as if she had her face on backwards. Herr Sussman got to business at once. She was to go and procure a trunk without delay, and to pack up Heidi's things and a good deal of Clara's clothes, so that the Swiss child might have everything that she needed to take home with her. Fräulein Rottenheimer stood as though rooted to the floor, staring at Herr Sussman. But he had no time to make further explanations, and he headed for his daughter's room. Sitting down next to Clara's bed, he told her who the ghost really was, and that Heidi was in very serious condition. If the habit of sleepwalking continued, some nights she might climb up on the roof, and that would be very dangerous, so he had decided to send Heidi at home at once. Clara was painfully surprised by this news, and at first she wanted to find some way out of this difficulty, but her father remained firm in his decision. He did promise to take her to Switzerland next year if she would be reasonable now and not cry. So Clara yielded to what couldn't be helped. She asked that Heidi's trunk be packed in her room so that she could put some special things in her friend would enjoy. In the meantime, Aunt Dita had arrived and stood waiting in the vestibule. Herr Sussman went out to her and told her how it was with Heidi and that he wanted her to take the child home at once, that very day. Her aunt looked disappointed, to say the least. She remembered the parting words of the uncle, that she should never come before his eyes ever again. Having taken the child to him and then taken her away, it did not seem advisable to be the one to take her back again. So she did not consider the matter long and started making excuses. It would be impossible for her to make the journey that day, and the next day would be too busy, and the day after. Fine, said Herr Sussman curtly, and he dismissed her. Then he called Sebastian and told him that he was to go that very day as far as Basel with the child, and the next day to take her home. There is one thing more, he said, and I want you to look out for it carefully. I am acquainted at the hotel in Basel, the name of which I have written on my card for you. Show my card there, and a good room will be given to you for the child. Go into her room and fasten all the windows securely. When she is in bed, fasten her door on the outside, for the child wanders in the night and might run into danger in a strange house. Do you understand me? Ah, that was it, was it? Said Sebastian in surprise, for a great light had just been thrown onto the ghost mystery. Yes, that was it. You're a coward, and you can tell Jennen that he is another one, said Herr Sussman, and then he went to his room to write a letter to the Almunkel. Meanwhile, Heidi stood waiting in her Sunday best. Tinette had roused her from sleep, taken her clothes out of the closet, and put them on her hurriedly without saying a word. She never talked with the uncultivated Heidi. She considered the child beneath her notice. Herr Sussman took his letter into the dining room where breakfast was being served and asked that Heidi be called to him. Well, what do you say to this, little one? He said as Heidi looked in amazement. You don't know anything about it, even now, Herr Sussman laughed. Well, you're going home today. Home? Said Heidi, hardly able to speak and turning white as snow. Don't you want to know something more about it? Said Herr Sussman. Yes, I do, gasped Heidi as she turned red. Good, said Herr Sussman. Now eat a hearty breakfast, and then into the carriage you go, and you will be away. But Heidi couldn't swallow a mouthful, though she tried. She was in such a state of excitement that she didn't know if she was awake or dreaming. Sebastian must take plenty of luncheon, said Herr Sussman to Fräulein Rottenheimer. And then he turned to Heidi. Go sit with Clara until the carriage comes. This is exactly what Heidi wanted, and she ran out of the room. In the middle of Clara's room was a huge trunk with the cover wide open. Come, called Clara. See what I have packed for you. And then she showed Heidi a number of things. Dresses and aprons, underwear and sewing materials. Finally, she held up a basket triumphantly. Heidi peeked inside and squealed, for there were 12 round white rolls for the grandmother. In their happiness, the children had forgotten that the moment had come for them to part. Suddenly they heard a call. The carriage is ready. And then there was no time to be sad. Heidi ran into her room. Her beautiful book from the grandmamma must still be there. No one could have packed it, for she always kept it under her pillow. She laid it in the basket along with the bread and opened her closet door to see if anything had been forgotten. To be sure, there was her old red neckerchief. Heidi wrapped it around something else and laid it on top of the basket so that the red parcel was quite conspicuous. Then she put on her fine hat and left the room. The two children had to say a speedy farewell, for Herr Sussman was waiting to take Heidi down to the carriage. Fräulein Rottenheimer stood at the head of the stairs to say goodbye. When she noticed the strange red bundle, she took it out of the basket and threw it on the floor. "No, Adelheid," she said, still finding fault. "You cannot leave carrying a thing like that." Heidi did not dare to pick up her bundle again, but she looked beseechingly at the master of the house, as if she were having her greatest treasure taken away from her. "No," said Herr Sussman. "The child shall carry home whatever gives her pleasure. If she takes away kittens or turtles, we will not be upset about it, Fräulein Rottenheimer." Heidi quickly picked up her bundle from the floor, her eyes beaming with gratitude. When Heidi reached the carriage, Herr Sussman held out his hand and wished her a happy journey. Heidi thanked him for all of his kindness. "And I leave 1,000 goodbyes for the doctor," she said. "Thank him for me." She remembered that it was the doctor who had told her the night before, "Tomorrow everything will be fine," and she thought that all of her good fortune was due to him. Soon after this, Heidi was sitting in the train, holding her basket. She would not let go of it. The precious rolls for grandmother were inside. She sat still for several hours, hardly able to realize she was really returning to her grandfather. She imagined how everything would look up on the Alm and thought about Peter the goatherd and the grandmother. Suddenly she said anxiously, "Sebastian, are you sure that the grandmother up on the Alm is not dead?" "No," he told her. "We hope she is not dead. She must still be alive." Heidi became absorbed in her own thoughts, but every few minutes she peeked into the basket, for her greatest desire was to lay all the rolls on the grandmother's table. "Sebastian," she said again, "if only we could be sure that the grandmother is still alive." Yes, yes," said Sebastian, half asleep. "She's still alive. I don't see any reason why not." After a while, Heidi's eyes also closed, and she did not wake up until Sebastian took her by the arm. "Wake up. We must get out now. We're in Basle." The next morning, they journeyed for several hours more. Heidi again sat with the basket on her lap. On no account would she even let Sebastian hold it. She did not speak, for every hour her eagerness became more intense. Then suddenly, when she wasn't thinking about it, came the call, "Mayenfield." She jumped up from her seat, and in less than a minute, it seemed, she and Sebastian were standing outside with the trunk, and the train was whistling away into the valley. Sebastian looked after it longingly. He did not look forward to a journey on foot, which would end in climbing a mountain. This could be hard, and dangerous besides, in a country where everything was still half wild as he thought it was. Not far away from the railway station stood a little wagon drawn by a thin horse. Into this, a broad-shouldered man was loading several large bags which had been brought by train. Sebastian stepped up and asked him what was the safest way to Dorfli. "All the ways are safe here," was the reply. Then Sebastian asked him about the best way that one could go without falling over the cliffs, and also how a trunk could be taken to Dorfli. The man looked at the trunk and measured it with his eyes. If it were not too heavy, he would take it in his wagon, he said, since he was going that way. Finally, it was arranged that the man would take both the child and the trunk, and that Heidi could be sent from Dorfli up the Alm with someone that night. "I can go alone. I know the way from Dorfli up the Alm," said Heidi, for she had been listening. A heavy load was taken away from Sebastian's mind when he found that he was not going to have to climb the mountain. He beckoned Heidi to one side and handed her a heavy roll and a letter to her grandfather. He explained that the roll was a present from Herr Sussman, which must be put in the bottom of her basket under the bread, and she must take very good care of it, for if it was lost, Herr Sussman would be disappointed. "I won't lose it," said Heidi, and placed the roll and the letter in the bottom of the basket. The trunk was loaded into the wagon, and then Sebastian lifted Heidi and her basket up to the seat and held out his hand to say goodbye. The driver swung himself up on the seat next to Heidi, and off the wagon rolled, while Sebastian, happy to escape the dreaded mountain journey, sat down at the station to wait for the next train. The man on the wagon was the baker of Dorfli, and he was carrying home his bags of flour. He had never seen Heidi, but like everyone else in Dorfli, he knew about the child that had been brought to the Almunkel. Also, he had known Heidi's parents, and he wondered if this was the much-spoken-of little girl. "You are the child who was with the Almunkel, your grandfather, aren't you?" he said. "Yes." "Did you fare badly? Is that why you have come home from so far?" "No one could have fared better than I did," said Heidi. "Why are you running home, then?" "Because Herr Sussman allowed me, or I would not be coming." "Bah! Why didn't you want to stay there if you were only allowed to come home?" "Because I would rather 1,000 times be at home with my grandfather on the Alm than anywhere else in the world." "You might think different when you get up there," said the baker. Then he began to whistle and said nothing more. Heidi looked around, trembling with excitement as she saw familiar landmarks. In the distance, she could see the lofty peaks of the Falkness Mountain looking down on her, and they seemed to be greeting her like good old friends. As they came to Dorfli, the clock was striking 5, and in the moment, a crowd of women and children came gathering around the wagon. "Thank you," said Heidi, as the baker lifted her from the cart. "My grandfather will come for my trunk." And we have a picture. She tried to run away, but people began asking her questions on all sides. Heidi pressed through the crowd with such anxiety on her face that they reluctantly made room and let her pass. "You see how frightened she is? She has every reason to be," they all said. And then they began to tell each other how the Almunkel was worse than ever and would not speak a word to anybody. And if the child had any sense, she would not run to the old dragon's nest. Here, the baker interrupted to tell about the gentleman who had brought the child as far as Mayenfield and parted from her in quite a friendly manner. He had paid the fare the baker had asked without even bargaining, and gave him an extra fee besides. Heidi had said that she had been well off where she was, but wanted to come back to her grandfather. This caused great surprise and was immediately spread throughout the entire town. In the meantime, Heidi ran up the mountain as fast as she could go, but now and then she had to stop to catch her breath. The basket was heavy, and the path seemed very steep. "Will the grandmother be sitting in the corner at her spinning wheel?" she thought. "Or did she die while I was gone?" Soon, Heidi saw the hut in the hollow on the Alm, and her heart began to throb. She ran faster. Her heart beat louder and louder, and by the time she reached the hut, she was trembling so much she could barely open the door. She ran into the room and stood for a moment unable to speak. "Our Heidi used to run in like that," came a voice from the corner. "Ah, if I could but see the child once more." "Here I am, grandmother. I really am," said Heidi. And she rushed into the corner and threw herself on her knees in front of the grandmother. The old lady stroked her curly hair, but was so overjoyed she could not speak. "Is it really you, child?" she said. "Are you really here?" "Yes, really, grandmother," said Heidi. "Don't cry. I'll come and see you every day, and I'll never go away again. And you won't have to eat hard bread for many days. See what I brought you." Heidi took one of her rolls out, and then the rest out of her basket, until she had piled all 12 in grandmother's lap. "Oh, child, what a blessing," said the grandmother. "But the greatest blessing is you." And she stroked the child's hair again. Just then Peter's mother came in. "Why, it's Heidi," she said. "How can it be possible?" Heidi stood and shook hands with Brigitte, who continued staring. "You should see what a beautiful dress she's wearing, Mother," she said. "Does that hat trimmed with feathers on the table belong to you, Heidi? Put it on so I can see how you look in it." "No," said Heidi. "You can have it. I don't need it anymore. I still have my own." And then Heidi opened her little red bundle and took out her old hat. She had never forgotten how, when she was leaving her grandfather, he had called after her that he never wanted to see her in a hat trimmed with feathers, which is why she had kept this one so carefully. At first, Brigitte refused to take the hat, but Heidi was firm. She laid it in the corner behind the grandmother's. Then she took off her lovely dress and folded the red neckerchief over her underwear. "Now, I must go home to my grandfather, but tomorrow I will come again. Good night, grandmother." "Yes, come again, Heidi. Come again tomorrow morning," said grandmother. "But why did you take off your beautiful dress?" said Brigitte. "Because I would rather go to my grandfather without it. He might not know me. You hardly knew me." Brigitte followed Heidi to the door. "You must take care of yourself," she whispered. "Peter says the uncle is always very cross and never speaks at all." But all Heidi said was good night, and went on up the mountain with her basket on her arm. The evening sun shone on the Alm, and soon the snowfield on Casampla came into sight, gleaming in the distance. Every few steps Heidi had to stand and look around her. A red glow fell on the grass at her feet. She turned around, and the rocky peaks on Falkness seemed to be in flames. The snowfield was aglow, and the rosy clouds were overhead, and down below the valley swam in a golden vapor. Heidi stood in the midst of all this glory, tears running down her cheeks. She had to fold her hands and pray aloud and say thank you for being back home, and that everything was more beautiful than she had remembered. Not until the light began to fade could she even move from the place. Then she ran so fast up the mountain that it wasn't very long before she saw the boughs of the fir tree above the roof, and then the roof, and then the whole hut. On the seat next to the hut sat her grandfather, smoking his pipe, and over the hut the old firs were rocking and roaring in the wind. Heidi ran all the faster, and before Almunkel could really see who was coming, she threw her basket on the ground and gave him a hug. In her excitement, she wasn't even able to say anything except, "Grandfather! Grandfather!" Neither did the grandfather say anything. For the first time in many years, his eyes grew moist. He loosened Heidi's arms from his neck and took her up on his knee. "So you've come home again," he said. "You don't look very well. Did they send you away?" "Oh, no," said Heidi. "Clara and the grandmamma and Herr Sessman were all so good to me. But you see, grandfather, I could hardly wait to come home again. Sometimes I thought I would choke, and I never said anything to them because that would have been ungrateful. Then suddenly one morning Herr Sessman called to me very early. I think the doctor was the cause of it, but maybe it says something in that letter." She jumped down and took the letter and the roll out of the basket and laid them in her grandfather's hand. "This is for you," she said, laying the roll on the seat next to him. He read the letter slowly and then put it in his pocket without a word. "Do you think that you can drink milk with me still, Heidi?" he said, taking her by the hand and leading her into the hut. "Bring your money with you. You can buy a bed with it and clothes for 2 or 3 years." "I don't need it, grandfather," said Heidi. "I have a bed already, and Clara packs so many clothes for me I won't ever need more." "Then we'll put this money in the cupboard. You can use it sometime." Heidi was delighted to see the inside of the hut again, and she looked in every corner and then climbed the ladder. "Grandfather," she called, "my bed is gone." "You'll soon have another. I didn't know that you were returning. Now come and drink your milk." Heidi came down and took her seat on her high stool. She grasped her little bowl and drank eagerly as if she had never had anything so delicious. "There's nothing in the world as good as our milk," she said. Then a whistle sounded outside, and Heidi ran out of the door like lightning. There was the whole flock of goats, skipping and jumping and leaping down from the heights, with Peter in the middle. When he saw Heidi, he stood still as though rooted to the spot. Heidi called, "Good evening, Peter." And then she rushed in amongst the goats. "Schwanli, Barley, do you know me?" The goats must have recognized your voice, for they rubbed your head up against her and began bleating. Heidi called them by name one after another, and they ran like wild things in confusion, crowding around her. She threw her arms around the affectionate Schliopi, stroked the violent Distelfunk, and was pushed and jostled hither and thither by the little animals. Finally, she pushed them aside and held out her hand to Peter. "Aren't you going to say good evening?" "Are you back again?" said Peter. "Will you come up on the mountain tomorrow?" "No, not tomorrow. Maybe the day after. Tomorrow I must go to the grandmother." "It's good to have you back," said Peter. He started back home, but he had never had so much trouble with the goats. Heidi walked away with one arm around Schwanli's neck and the other around Barley's neck, and all the others turned and ran after the three of them. Heidi had to go into the shed with her two goats and shut the door, or Peter would have never gotten the rest of the flock away. When Heidi came back into the hut, she found her bed made all again, wonderfully high and fragrant, for the hay had not been there long. Grandfather had carefully spread clean linen sheets over it, and Heidi lay down and had a refreshing sleep, such as she had not enjoyed for an entire year. And during the night, Grandfather left his bed at least 10 times, climbing the ladder and listening to make sure she wasn't restless. But Heidi slept and went sleepwalking no more, for her great longing had been satisfied. She had seen the mountains and the cliffs in the evening glow, and she had heard the fir trees roar. She was home again on the Alm. And that is the end of quite a satisfying chapter. I'm glad Heidi got to go home. I'm also glad that Grandfather obviously just missed her. I mean, there's not much more you can say. He was lonely and grumpy, and I get that. Anyway, with that, we are going to leave it tonight. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed that chapter, and I will see you tomorrow.